Since the dawn of time, or at least since animals got bored of being blobs in the ocean, life has been diversifying. But how does one species become many? Is it magic? Is it science? Or is it just an ambitious family reunion?
This is adaptive radiation, which sounds like something you'd get if you stood too close to a microwave with a lizard. But actually, it's a process where one species branches out into many new ones.
From Darwin's finches in the Galapagos to whatever those Hawaiian fruit flies are doing, evolution has been hard at work. It takes one thing and turns it into several things that don't quite look like the original thing.
In this documentary, we, unfunded biology students with Wi-Fi access, will attempt to explain this grand evolutionary phenomenon using science and possibly YouTube clips. This is From One to Many.
Since the beginning of time, humans have asked, where did life come from? Why do they suddenly show up even if you think something is clean? The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle had one of the earliest theories.
Aristotle believed in spontaneous generation, that life could just magically appear from non-living things. If a substance possessed pneuma or vital heat, life is possible. He noted instances of fish suddenly appearing in new puddles of water as his evidence.
This theory persisted into the 17th century, and the idea made perfect sense at the time. If you couldn't see germs without a microscope, you blamed the filth itself.
The theory was so popular that other scientists did additional experimentation on it. Jean-Baptiste van Helmont, a 17th century Flemish scientist, said that mice suddenly appeared among the grains in barns after the roof leaked and the grain molded.
Now we all know that the conditions were just ideal for mice to swoop in and eat all your food. And that is thanks to Louis Pasteur, a French scientist who decided to boil everything down until the truth come out.
Louis Pasteur did an experiment where he covered the hole in one flask and left another one open while he sterilized the broths inside. He then concluded that the microbes came from outside the flask, not inside, which helped disprove Aristotle's spontaneous generation.
This was revolutionary for science as Pasteur disproved the centuries-old theories and supported the idea of biogenesis, where all living things come from other living things. Still, how did we manage biogenesis?
A popular theory in the origin of life is called the biogenesis, where it says that we came from something called the primordial state. Surprisingly, it is something you can just cook up, but only in the lab with chefs called Stanley Miller and Harold Urey.
They followed the recipe of someone called Alexander Oparin and J.B.S. Haldane in 1924, who said that the ingredients for life were inorganic compounds from the primordial Earth's atmosphere and oceans, namely methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor. Through lightning and UV rays, chemical reactions were induced to form today's compounds.
Though I doubt you could get this at your local market.
With the Miller-Urey experiment, they formed amino acids, the building blocks of protein, and intermediates in the synthesis of RNA nucleotides, leading to the RNA world hypothesis, where RNA life was abundant through prebiotic chemical reactions with RNA catalysts producing multiple life forms. Eventually, these molecules were enclosed in membranes, forming the protocells branching off into the prokaryotes.
But all of this was just about how life started. What no one asked was, what did life do next?
Life did what it always does. When it's left for 5 minutes, it changed.
To make sense of this biological chaos, people like Edward Hitchcock drew a sort of family tree for fossils. Then Charles Darwin came along with his Origin of Species, featuring a diagram that said, all of these things are related somehow, and the world has been arguing about it ever since. phylogenetic trees or cladogram became staple in the field of phylogenetics to construct and evaluate hypotheses about how life branched off. We start with roots, the common ancestor of all taxa or group of organisms in the tree. Changes occur in the taxa leading to nodes depicting the recent common ancestor of lineages branching from it.
Today, we use paleontological data as well as genetic data like DNA and RNA sequences to pinpoint when exactly we evolved, since there are genes that are highly conserved and those that are rapidly changing.
So, in tracing the branches and nodes of the tree, it helps us understand how we even managed to evolve the bacteria that usually makes us sick.
We have here the face of Eco Evo Devo, Mr. Carl Ian John Haliasgo, the face that we will truly remember. Magandang umaga, sir. So, sir, we heard that life came from something we call primordial soup. Is it edible?
Primordial soup is not edible since it's coming from a mixture of different things, materials that are not being eaten by a lot of organisms.
Then how did cells come from that soup? Did a dirty ladle mix it?
Yes, it came from a mixture of dirty ladle, given that it's a mixture of both organic and inorganic materials, providing the life that we know of today.
So if life started in soup, does that mean evolution is basically just nature slowly learning how to do meal prep?
But what actually makes those branches split? How does one species decide, you know what? I'm going to be something else now. Speciation is a scientific word for when one species decides it's had enough of being just one thing and splits into two or more different species.
This occurs when populations become separated, often by geographic, behavioral, or genetic barriers, reducing gene flow and allowing differences to accumulate. Over time, these changes lead to the formation of new species with unique traits, shaped by natural selection, genetic drift, or environmental demands. Thus, a single species splits into two or more distinct, genetically independent lineages.
Reproductive isolation sounds like something that happens during a pandemic, but in evolution, it means two groups of animals can no longer make babies together, even if they really want to. Or don't. Either way, no babies.
Even when they lived in the same area, or what we call sympatric. These mechanisms are crucial in the process of speciation, as they help maintain the genetic distinctiveness of species. They become especially evident when populations that were once separated geographically, or what we call allopatric, come into contact again. If these populations have accumulated sufficient genetic differences during isolation, they may no longer be able to interbreed successfully.
I'm here with Xavier University's Biology Department Professor, Sir Paulo Fugala.
Hello. It's good to be out of isolation.
So in speciation, we have reproductive isolation, where two species can interbreed and produce viable offspring. So how could that be when, the forest is noisy with frog mating calls?
Well, it's not all about mating songs and mating calls when we talk about reproduction. It could also be a factor that the different species actually are separated physically, even though all of them are in the same forest. Some could be living atop the trees, some could be on the ground. So even if they are in the same environment singing the same songs, they would never be able to meet because they are in different levels of the forest.
Then why can't we just give them singing lessons?
Sometimes species just needs a little bit of space, and not metaphorical space, actual. Physical barriers like mountains, rivers, or oceans. This is known as geographic isolation, which is basically a nature's way of saying, let's take a break, but with continents. Geographic isolation is a form of reproductive isolation that occurs when populations of the same species become physically separated by geographical barriers like rivers, mountains, oceans, or deserts. This physical separation prevents gene flow between the populations, allowing them to evolve independently over time. As a result, geographic isolation is one of the primary drivers of allopatric speciation, the formation of new species due to geographic separation. When populations are separated, they may face different environmental conditions and selective pressures, or undergo random genetic changes such as mutation and genetic drift. Over many generations, these differences can accumulate and lead to genetic divergence.
To illustrate this process, imagine a large population of land snails divided into three races: A, B, and C. These groups are adapted to slightly different environments, but they are still part of one species. Where the groups meet, A with B and B with C, they interbreed, forming zones of intermediate individuals. Now imagine a large river forms, cutting through the area and isolating race C from race B. Over time, the snails in population C are no longer able to exchange genes with other races. During this long period of geographic isolation, race C undergoes independent evolution, shaped by its own environmental pressures and genetic changes.
After many generations, the river dries up and populations B and C come into contact again. Two outcomes are possible. One, they may interbreed again and reestablish a population with intermediate characteristics. Or two, they may fail to interbreed due to having diverged so much genetically. If this happens, they are now reproductively isolated, meaning race C has become a new species called C in the model. In this example, geographic isolation initiated the process of divergence, and reproductive isolation completed the formation of a new species. Eventually, even if the big dramatic mountains and rivers that split them disappears, the two populations may look at each other and go, nah, they've changed so much genetically that mating is no longer on the table. They are now officially different species, or as science calls it, irreconcilable biological differences.
So now that we've got these new species, and some of them might have no reason to meet or mate again, and that's where adaptive radiation comes in. It's a speciation, but with a multitude of new species popping up also very quickly because there are so many new niches and places to fill.
So what is adaptive radiation? Henry Osborn, no, not the one who turns into a goblin, was a prominent paleontologist who said that adaptive radiation is an essential part of evolution. It represents the differentiation of habit in several directions from a primitive type. Kind of like when you have a group of high school friends that evolve for different career paths. Osborn's concept on adaptive radiation is a process where early mammals evolved into many different forms to fill various roles. Placental mammals first spread during the Cretaceous, reaching a peak with the Praecofauna, and later underwent a second evolutionary wave in the Miocene, leading to modern species. Adaptive radiation occurs in all vertebrates, but it's most prominent in mammals due to their high plasticity. Early mammals were small, clawed insect eaters or omnivores. Terrestrial forms first appeared, followed by aquatic types. Local adaptive radiation occurs in the same area among related species competing for resources, leading to traits like longer legs or taller teeth. In Africa, our Siamese grazes with tall teeth, while our bicornis browses with shorter ones. Ancient hoofed mammals also showed size and speed differences that led to new evolutionary lines. Similar forms can evolve independently in different regions, a process called parallelism or homoplasy. Through the resemblance is never exact. Natural selection is nature's way of picking winners. Those best suited to survive pass on their traits. Over time,
This process can lead to adaptive regulation, where one species branches out into many, each adapted to a different lifestyle, like evolution trying on outfits to see what works best. Natural selection works through several key steps. First, individual varying traits like size or speed. Some of these traits are inherited from parents. More offspring are produced than can survive and reproduce. In the wild, it's less survival of the fittest and more survival of the ones who don't mess it up. The creatures with traits that actually help, like running fast or blending in, tend to survive and make more of themselves. The rest, well, they contributed to the fossil record.
Darwin's finches are what happens when a bunch of birds go on holiday and forget to come back the same. They started off as one species, but after a bit of island living and a lot of big trial and error, they turn into over a dozen. Like birds, playing dress up for survival, but with way more evolution and less glitter.
Around 2 million years ago, a small group of finches flew from South America to the Galapagos Islands. They arrived as one species, but over time they evolved into many, differing in size and especially in beak shape. This change was driven by the need to adapt to different food sources. Some developed long, narrow beaks for catching insects, while others evolved strong, broad beaks for cracking seeds and nuts. Today, they're considered the poster birds for something called adaptive radiation, which is evolution's fancy way of saying one bird, many jobs.
Adaptive radiation is like nature's way of sending animals on a journey to find their perfect job. From lizards with a thing for twigs to polar bears with a thing for ice. Evolution's got everyone covered, one beak, fin, or paw at a time.
In the tropics, anoles lizards in the Caribbean went all out with evolution, turning into different species that prefer very specific parts of trees. Some like twigs, some like trunks, and some probably just wanted a better view. Meanwhile, in African lakes, cichlid fish exploded into hundreds of species, each with a unique way of eating things, like scraping algae, crushing snails, or disturbingly, nibbling on other fishes' scales. In the more polite temperate regions, squirrels decided to branch out. Some climb trees, some burrow underground, and some just launched themselves into the air and became flying squirrels. And in the polar regions, brown bear got tired of forests, went north, and slowly transformed into polar bears, complete with white fur, built-in fat storage, and paws designed for ice walking and Olympic-level swimming.
So next time, when you see a weird animal and think, why are you like this? When your other sibling are like this? The answer might just be adaptive radiation, or it might be a purpose. Who knows? This one's still a mystery.
Here we have Xavier University's Master of Biology, Sir Edgar Bisoro.
Hi, hello everyone.
So, sir, the viewers want to know about what's the difference between adaptive radiation and regular old evolution.
For regular evolution, so it is actually the transformation of organism from simpler to more complex type. So more or less it's linear to some. While in adaptive radiation, it is actually more on the speciation of organisms based on their adaptations to different niches or habitat. So islands are good areas for what I call for this type of speciation or adaptive radiation. So example in the Philippines we have actually like frogs, the birds. So based on their location, so they're actually related organisms but are actually considered as different species found in the different areas of the archipelago.
So there is another question, sir. Why does adaptive radiation mostly happen in isolated places like lakes and islands? Does evolution just want a bit of privacy?
So usually organisms evolve because of isolation. So habitat isolation results to what we call specific adaptation to some organisms. And then because of the new habitat and new pressures that are present in the area, organisms tend to what we call adapt and survive, and then eventually mutations can happen. So microevolution, then macroevolution.
So last question, sir. When animals do adaptive radiation, is it like they've been exposed to a special kind of radiation and now they have to learn how to adapt to it? Or like they suddenly grow new body parts from all the weird rays?
Dolphins and sharks both have streamlined bodies, dorsal fins, and pectoral fins. But while one is a friendly mammal that chats and squeaks, the other is basically a torpedo with teeth. Yet, both ended up with the same kind of design. Probably because they both live in what scientists call wet. Sometimes adaptive radiation pulls a funny one. Imagine two organisms from completely different families evolving to look exactly the same. Not because they're related, no, that would be too obvious, but because they ended up in the same kind of environment. This is called convergent evolution, or what I call Mother Nature pressing Ctrl C and Ctrl V in different Google Docs. But if you want a better understanding of convergent evolution, let us revisit the Anolis lineage through a fusion of these two phylogenetic trees. The Caribbean islands are rich in biodiversity, with lush rainforests that support diverse ecological niches. On the phylogenetic tree, all Puerto Rican anoles form one clade, while all Hispaniola anoles form another, indicating that each island's ecomorphs evolved independently from a common ancestor unique to that island. Despite this, similar types of anolis ecomorphs appear on each island due to similar environmental pressures. Phylogenetic data show that lizards with the same ecomorph, such as the trunk-ground anoles Anolis cristatellus from Puerto Rico and Anolis cybotes from Hispaniola, are not closely related as they appear on separate branches. Instead, each is more closely related to other anoles on their own island, even if those differ in ecomorph. Aside from anolis lizards, polar animals like seals in the Arctic and Antarctic have also evolved specific adaptations to survive in cold environments, such as the ability to store large amounts of body fat known as blubber, and this fat serves as both insulation, helping to retain body heat even in the water, and an energy reserve for times when food is scarce. This pattern of unrelated species developing similar physical traits due to occupying similar ecological roles is a clear example of convergent evolution.
So, after seeing how anolis lizards on different Caribbean islands came up with nearly identical solutions to the same problem, you might be asking, that's convergence for you. But what if those solutions came from the same family tree, like distant cousins trying to outdo each other? Well, that's where parallel evolution comes in. And we see it clearly with three-spined stickleback fish because sometimes evolution likes to hit replay on the same genetic tape, but this time with fish in different lakes doing the exact same thing.
In a famous experiment by Dr. Robert Bell, he studied stickleback fish in isolated freshwater lakes in British Columbia, Canada. These lakes were once connected to the ocean, but over time, the sticklebacks became isolated due to the changes in water levels. The fish that remain in these freshwater lakes evolved distinct physical traits from their ocean-dwelling relatives.
What makes this case of parallel evolution so compelling is that despite these populations being geographically separated, they evolved similar characteristics from the same ancestral stock. Essentially, they were rewriting the same script of their siblings, but independently in different locations.
As goes the ego of humans, we ask ourselves, do we have a part in adaptive radiation? Well, turns out it makes them evolve faster. We call it human-induced adaptive radiation. But that's a mouthful, so we'll go with urban evolution. The phenomenon of urban evolution has emerged as a fascinating modern example of adaptive radiation. As humans continue to modify the landscape, cities themselves have become hotspots for rapid evolutionary changes. For example, rats have adapted to urban environments, exploiting different food sources, nocturnal behavior, and new breeding patterns, sometimes becoming genetically distinct from their relatives. Similarly, cockroaches thrive in human homes, evolving specialized feeding habits and exploiting new habitats. But the most famous example of urban evolution are our very own government spies. Kids and adults alike love to chase them, and our elderly love feeding them. Yes, I'm talking about the mighty pigeons. City pigeons are descended from wild rock pigeons, also known as columbalivia, which originally lived in rocky coastal areas and used cliffs for nesting. As humans built cities, pigeons adapted by using buildings and bridges as substitutes for cliffs. In urban environments, pigeons became less cautious around humans and developed the ability to recognize those who feed them or pose a threat, unlike their wild cousins. Additionally, urban pigeons became more opportunistic feeders, scavenging human food waste, which allowed them to thrive in cities where food can be scarce for other species who rely on fruiting seasons in the wild.
We've seen how life evolves either from species copying each other to thriving on our scraps. But what happens when the environment hits the reset button? Enter extinction.
Extinction is when a species goes from being a thing to not a thing, like a deleted file on a nature's hard drive. It happens when all the individuals in a population stop existing, which sounds dramatic, because it is. One minute you've got dodos everywhere, pecking out whatever, and then the next, boom, you don't.
Extinction is the complete disappearance of a biological population, occurring when the number of individuals declines to zero, making continued survival impossible. It is a stochastic or random process influenced by factors such as environmental changes, demographic fluctuations, and limited resources. Extinction occurs when a population crosses a critical threshold beyond which recovery can no longer happen, marking an irreversible end to its existence.
Okay, let's talk more about extinction. It's when animals just stop existing, but sometimes that happens all at once, like in the late Quaternary megafauna extinction. That's a fancy name for when loads of huge animals disappeared, like 13,000 to 10,000 years ago, which is like yesterday in Earth time. This event wiped out the big boys of the Ice Age: mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths. And not to forget, the direwolf. Yep, not the Game of Thrones type, but an actual giant wolf. These guys were living their best lives until, boom, extinction. Just like that.
The direwolf, or Canis dirus, is a powerful predator of the Ice Age, vanished around 10,000 years ago during the mass extinction that wiped out many large species at the end of the Pleistocene. Once widespread across North and South America, direwolves were larger and stronger than modern gray wolves, weighing up to 150 pounds. As apex predators, they hunted large prey like bison, camels, and horses in packs. Despite their size and hunting skills, they couldn't survive the changing climate, shifting ecosystems, and competition with other predators, including early humans. And so, after dominating the plains for thousands of years, the direwolf faded into extinction, leaving only fossils behind.
The reasons for the extinction of direwolves are still up for debate, but some scientists think it was because of climate change, overhunting by humans, and maybe just some very rude competition from other species. Basically, they had a lot of problems, but who doesn't?
The extinction of the direwolf remains a topic of debate, with several key factors contributing to its demise. First, climate change. As the Ice Age ended, the planet warmed, transforming vast grasslands and tundra into forests. This shift reduced the open spaces the direwolf needed for hunting and led to a decline in large herbivores, their primary food source. Habitat loss and dwindling prey likely drove their decline. Second, human hunting. The overkill hypothesis suggests that early humans may have played a role in the extinction of megafauna, including the direwolf. As humans spread across the Americas, they may have hunted or outcompeted direwolves for territory and resources, adding pressure to the species already struggling with environmental changes. Lastly, competition with other species. Another factor was competition with the more adaptable gray wolf. Smaller, more versatile, and better suited to changing environments, the gray wolf may have outcompeted the direwolf for food and territory, further hastening its extinction. In the end, the direwolf couldn't survive the combined pressures of climate change, human expansion, and competition, leaving it to fade into extinction.
Right. So after an extinction, massive or not, everything's a bit of a mess. A bunch of species disappear and suddenly, all their jobs are up for grabs. This is when adaptive radiation happens. It's like nature's version of everyone gets a trophy.
Adaptive radiation occurs after an extinction event when the disappearance of species leaves behind vacant ecological niche. This opens the door for the surviving organisms to diversify and evolve, filling these newly available roles in the ecosystem. As the environment changes, whether through shifts in climate, the loss of predators, or the disappearance of competitors, new opportunities for survival arise. The survivors, often with increased genetic variation, undergo rapid speciation. This process allows them to adapt to the different environmental pressures and resources that are now at their disposal. Ultimately, adaptive radiation leads to the emergence of multiple new species, all originating from a common ancestor, with each species specializing in its own specific ecological niche. This process is nature's way of reshaping life, turning a moment of loss into an explosion of new life forms.
So, after extinction, adaptive radiation kicks off with a big bang of new species, like a party where everyone shows up. But here's the paradox. The party slows down.
Adaptive radiation often begins with a rapid explosion of new species, filling the ecological void left by extinct organisms. However, this burst of diversification doesn't last forever. As time passes, the rate of speciation slows down. The reason for this is simple. As more species evolve, ecological niche becomes saturated. The survivors become increasingly specialized to their specific roles within the ecosystem, and competition for resources intensifies. This greater competition limits the potential for further diversification, leaving fewer opportunities for new species to emerge. Thus, while adaptive radiation starts with a rapid surge of new life, it inevitably slows and stabilizes as ecosystems reach a delicate equilibrium.
After mass extinction, there's this thing scientists call the replacement model. Basically, when one group of species disappears, another group turns up and says, right, we live here now.
The replacement model refers to the process by which new or surviving species evolve to fill the ecological roles left vacant after an extinction event. When species disappear, whether due to mass extinction or more localized events, their absence creates open niches in ecosystems, such as predator, herbivore, or decomposer roles. It suggests that these vacant roles are eventually replaced by other organisms, often from entirely different evolutionary lineages that adapt to perform similar functions. This model highlights the resilience and adaptability of life, showing how ecosystems can reconstruct themselves over time, not by bringing back extinct species, but by allowing others to evolve and take their place.
For example, after the dinosaurs got wiped out, big crash, huge bang, Earth had a bit of a makeover. And guess who showed up? Us! We didn't come from dinosaurs, obviously, but we did pop up around 7 million years ago, starting with some little primate who thought, hey, I'll try walking on two legs.
After waves of extinction reshaped the planet, wiping out towering beasts and ancient predators, Earth was left wide open, full of new opportunities, and in this quiet aftermath, a new kind of creature began to rise. Humans. It started around 7 million years ago in Africa with a small primate called Sahelanthropus. It probably walked upright, a simple step, but one that would lead to an entirely new way of being. Later came Australopithecus, including the famous fossil Lucy. She walked on two legs too, but still had a small brain. Part ape, part human, and perfectly suited for survival in a changing world. Then came a breakthrough, the genus Homo. Around 2.5 million years ago, Homo habilis appeared using tools. Homo erectus followed, mastering fire and leaving Africa behind to explore the wider world. But it was Homo sapiens emerging about 300,000 years ago that would change everything. We made sharper tools, formed deeper bonds, and began to think symbolically, painting on cave walls, burying our dead, and telling stories around the fire. By 40,000 years ago, we had become explorers, artists, and survivors. And when the last ice age ended, we didn't just adapt. We invented agriculture, settled down, and built the first foundations of civilization, from a single upright step to changing the planet.
So our class truly discussed a lot for just one short documentary.
I hope you had fun going through our amateur National Geographic documentary.
But in case we bored you with all our terms, here's the recap.
From an ancient ideas of life appearing out of filth, to lab experiments that sparked molecules into motion, our understanding of life's origin has come a long way. What began as spontaneous generation ended in the simmering broth of abiogenesis, branching the complex of tree life that connects every organism, bacteria, plants, and animals.
Speciation happens when populations become separated by geographic, behavioral, or genetic barriers, leading to reduced gene flow and the accumulation of differences. Over time, these barriers, whether prezygotic or postzygotic, result in reproductive isolation and eventually new species. Often through processes like allopatric or sympatric speciation or adaptive radiation when new niches emerge.
Adaptive radiation is a process where a single ancestral species evolves into multiple distinct species, each adapted to a different ecological niche. It's a key driver of biodiversity, as seen in examples like Darwin's finches, Caribbean anoles, and African cichlids.
Sometimes the adaptive radiation process leads unrelated species to evolve similar traits in similar ecological niche. This is convergent evolution. When related species evolve similarly but separately, it's called parallel evolution. And now we directly see urban evolution, a modern form of adaptive radiation where animals adapt to city environments and develop new traits to survive alongside humans.
Finally, extinction is when a species completely disappears, like nature deleting a file, usually because of climate change, competition, or humans being simply humans. But when that happens, adaptive radiation kicks in. A surviving species quickly evolve to fill the empty rows, turning the mess into a burst of new life.
So this how life radiated.
Thankfully, without any radiation involved.
This has been From One
To Many!
Tatanong ka dito. Or hawa na lang diya.
Well, it's not about mating calls and songs. It's about the structures for the reproductive mating.
This theory made perfect sense at the time. Persisted
Ano, hindi mo kay sir ang camera?
Okay, camera share ba po? Aw, ako na yung nag-introduce, sorry. Kalimot ko.
We have here the face of Echo Evodebo, Mr. Carl E. and John Haliasgo, the face that we will truly remember. Magandang umaga, sir.
Uy, nag-acting na ako dito.
Ano, wala college, sir! Ano, wala na video, sir!
Acting sir, 1, 2, 3, go. Pa-serious, pa-sir. Like, ano ko? Ikaw na po.
Mali.
So our class
Action.
So our class really discussed a lot. Oh,